And I'll tell you, something like that, that's hard. It makes you reflect back, and you don't reflect back. I didn't reflect back on the money I spent on groceries or if I overspent or if I didn't, or if I hit my budget. What I was reflecting on is, did I tell my eldest that I loved her today in the midst of it? Did I tell my little, did I give them a hug? Did I tell my husband that I appreciate him? And so all of those things, that's what hits you. And those are the things we forget the most.
This is BetterWealth with Caleb Guilliams. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the BetterWealth podcast. You're listening to this. We're not live, but this is going out on Friday. And I don't necessarily know how to open this up other than the fact that we're very, very intentional at BetterWealth that we're more than just a money company. And one of my visions of starting a vlog documenting the journey is I really believe that we're going to get people to fall in love with the people, the mission, and I just keep going back on all the conversations that I've had with people that have broke down crying in the process of talking to us, saying, "You've inspired me to live more intentionally. You've inspired me to make certain decisions." And so we've committed from day one that we're going to show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And because we're not perfect, and our company is not perfect, but we're striving not for perfection, but to live intentionally and not be hypocrites. So today's episode is going to be a tough one, but it's going to be reality. And I know for some of you diehards, you've been missing Mariah. And for some of you diehards, you also let us know that we forgot, or we didn't forget. We did not release an episode on Friday. What was that, a couple weeks back?
About a month ago, it was the
Yeah.
25th.
And so I think it'll make a lot more sense. So with that, Mariah, this is going to be a very special episode. Thank you for being in the studio.
Thank you for being here to walk through what you said was a difficult episode. To those diehard listeners, Caleb and I had a meeting with a diehard listener, and when we were talking about all the wonderful things we'd done for the podcast and surpassing 200 episodes and surpassing the amount of subscribers and all those different things that we had done, we said, but we missed one. And she said, yes, you did. And it was kind of heartbreaking to have to share with her why we missed it. On that Friday, we were ready to go.
Yeah.
And I had a meeting, was going to Starbucks, heading to a doctor's appointment, and I was going to be over at the house shortly after my routine checkup for the baby. And I called you and said, I can't be there today because we found out that the heartbeat wasn't there. And Trevor and I had lost our baby. We were close to 20 weeks, so halfway through. And that was really hard. I know you said automatically, don't worry about anything. My head was on work because it was the one thing that I knew that I could grab hold of reality. And I was trying to figure things out and fix it because in that moment, I couldn't fix what was going on. And that was a really hard moment. So I know that what I said dropped a bomb on you and the team.
Yeah.
It was hard too because in a moment like this, we understand that, and I understand that loss tends to make people silent, because we know we can't fix things, and that's hard. But I am on here today. You were very sensitive about saying, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I knew and believe very much that the Better Wealth family and you listeners who have been a part of our journey needed to also be a part of why we weren't going to be celebrating the birth of what we found out is our son. But I said, no, Caleb, I want to be here to share why God is so good and why this community is so good and why I'm okay to sit here because we named our son Gideon. And Gideon means man of valor or mighty man of valor. It's a biblical name. And we named him that not because Trevor and I would ever see him grow up to be a mighty man of valor, but because God was so good and showed up to protect us in so many mighty ways. We had so many people also an army of people behind us during the grieving, and we have had an incredible amount of people who have served us in this time. And so I asked Caleb. Caleb said, "Well, how do we really lead through this podcast? Because this is going to be hard." And I wanted to share my heart with the team. I wanted to share my heart with the listeners um, because, oh, like I said, this is just so speechless. But what's happening right now is for some of you who are listening, you can't imagine this loss. You can't imagine what loss is like, because fortunately, maybe you haven't had somebody that close. For some of you, you have experienced tremendous loss beyond what even I can imagine. And your heart is connecting right now to those memories and the ones that you have lost. And for some of you, you're right there with me because you have lost similarly situation as mine. And um, with that, I just want to say thank you because I know that right now your heart is just sad and your heart is grieving. But I also want to say thank you because we have intentionally lived, we have been able to sit with people in an amazing way to grieve. Um, and I know that with like your experience, and I just want to ask you, Better Wealth was kind of founded on loss.
Yeah.
You really
Yeah.
had a situation where what was that like for the first
Yeah.
loss of Better Wealth?
Well, a couple things, and I don't even know if you know this story. And maybe sometime I can get my mom on here and talk about that. But I my I'm only here because of my mom losing their first baby, and it was around that same, like, it was that 3-4 month
Mhm.
period of time. And so um it's it's incredibly heartbreaking, and I mean, I obviously wasn't there, and again, I'm only here because of that tragedy. But what you're referring to is Better Wealth. Better Wealth was very much, like, designed for family, and we knew that the way that people were handling their money was just not working. And so Greg, who we have an episode, and I would encourage every single person to go back and find the Greg Helema episode. He was not only a great friend of ours, but he was like a second father figure, and he was one of my first clients. And he was working in IT. He was a project manager, but he pretty much, his faith, family, and then we were up there with his work. I mean, he spent so much time. And so I remember the moment that he told me that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it's crazy because in the world of, like, even what we do, he was super healthy. He got the best health rating. This is not on any of our radars. Um, and it hit me, and I obviously I was very angry. I was very saddened. I Because I had this vision. I mean, we're dominating now. Imagine if we could have him by our side this whole time. It would just been amazing. And so I got to walk through cancer with him, spent quite a bit of time in the hospital with him. And the reason is he meant so much to me, but I think I was the ultimate beneficiary. I really sincerely mean that. Like, I mean, one of the things that he said is, Caleb, I don't want you to have to get cancer to get this idea of intentional living. A lot of people ask, like, why intentional living is so important. Like, his one word was intentional living. And by all means, like, not that anyone's taking notes or keeping score, but very intentional with his kids, had date date night with kids, and had a very, like, becoming a man ceremony, and, like, very, very intentional dad. And in his words, he wasn't scratching the surface. And and that cancer diagnosis was the wake up call. And so one of the last words that he said to me was, he's like, Caleb, like, don't forget the reason why you started. And what he was referring to is, I have a tendency of being very competitive. I mean, you've seen it. I'm a very obsessive type of person. And I think he wanted to make sure that we stayed true to why we started Better Wealth to begin with. And even recently, it's crazy as our community is growing, how many stories we're hearing of loss. I mean, we have someone going through our process that lost a daughter
Mhm.
in a tragic accident. And so it's like, how do you process that? And so it's just like one of those things where um I wanna thank you, number 1, for sharing. I think it no I number 2, it's made me appreciate the work that you do a lot more because I had to take on Mariah's role for a week, and yet I still had to yell at you for working during some time, and yet, I think it's been crazy how many times it's crazy when you share how many people are open to being very open to share back, and that's you're not gonna see a lot of wealth companies with episodes like this. For better or worse, it might turn some people away. I don't really care. I think life is really short, and a lot of people are living with maybe regret. Some people are living with maybe need a kick in the pants, and I hope that something tragic doesn't have to happen to you or your family for that wake up call.
Right, and one of the things a lot of times in a very vulnerable situation like this, the greatest fear is that my heart is misinterpreted, so even though I'm not bawling my eyes out right now, I still get teary-eyed. It's still really hard to talk about with our girls, um, especially with the littles who are constantly waiting for the baby to come, "Mom, when is the baby gonna come? And I hope they come soon, and I want a brother. I know I want a sister," and there's still moments that are really hard. So please know that just because I'm not bawling right now doesn't mean that Trevor and I have not grieved deeply, um, or have been in great sorrow over the situation. But one of the things why I can sit here today, and this is a testimony not only of my faith in God and God's strength in me every day, but when we talk about the body of Christ, when we talk about intentional living with Greg, I love that he as hard as his situation is, if that is the thing that our team remembers, even if we don't know him, then intentional living is important. The reason why I'm sitting here today is because Trevor and I have intentionally sown into other lives, not just our own. We have been intentional in our work.
Yeah,
We have been intentional servers with our friends. We've been intentional servers with our families. We have prayed with them. We have thought with them. We have fought alongside them. We have done those things. All of those intentional leavings, even though, just like Greg, we didn't scratch the surface of what we could have done in the lives of our friends or our families, where we could have even been more. But let me tell you where you can see intentional living into fruition is when, not if, when a hard time comes, you have an army of people behind you who are willing to serve. And so, because Trevor and I had intentionally sewn in, and not at our best ability, but what we had, we did. We had the BetterWealth team saying, "Don't worry about anything. We're going to pick it up. You stay home, you rest, you focus on your family. We're going to survive. We're not." I mean, you were like, "I am so sorry." On Saturday, it was like a week later, and you're like, "I didn't want to email you once. I didn't want to talk to you once, but I just am stuck."
I couldn't make a week, but
But he did very good. It was like, "It'll just be 5 minutes. We'll just be really quick. Let's go."
yeah,
But something like that is important. Something like that is, we just had an episode with David Bookbinder, and, um, and one of the things that he talks about is an importance that companies have with seeing their employees and
yeah,
being empathetic towards their employees, and I very much appreciate, all of this empathy that came from Better Wealth. Also, what it allowed Trevor and I to do is connect a little bit deeper with some of our team members. We
yeah,
didn't know the loss that some of our team members had done, and so even just with them sharing a little bit of their story gave us the strength. Yes, today I can stand. Today I can step up, and today I can be okay because they're okay,
yeah,
and so intentional living allows you to have an army of people who are willing to support you. The other thing that is super important that's different is when you tell somebody that you've lost, if they don't, and this isn't a judgment, this is just an observation throughout my life. If they don't have a servant heart, then usually they don't know how to grieve with you in regards to, "Oh, and it's over." One of the friends that I deeply love, I called right after you and Trevor to tell her, and she literally wept with me. I'm reminded of when Jesus goes and Lazarus has died and Mary and they're all crying, and it says that Jesus wept. And a lot of people will say it's because he was sad, which I bet he was sad. Knowing that he was going to raise Lazarus, I think the biggest thing is Jesus's heart was a servant heart, and when he saw that his friends were grieving, there is a servitude to grieve with them. There's
yeah,
like a part of their servant heart. And so I had a lot of people who grieved with me, whether or not it was a moment of silence, whether or not it was Trevor and I asked the team, I know that even if you don't have words to say to us, please don't, but just go back and be reflecting on fragile blessings that we have in our lives. And I know that that Friday you dropped the episode of like gratitude or the dog pees on your
Yeah.
gratitude
Well,
journal.
what's interesting is I actually recorded that the day that I heard the news,
Mm,
but it just didn't because of logistics. It dropped that Friday, but I just was like, there's no way I wanted to go record an episode.
mhm,
But then as I'm walking, I'm realizing, okay, I'm alive,
mhm,
the sun's shining, and I just kept on like, and yes, in the midst of even like the ultimate irony, it was like, okay, it's just and again it may come across not empathetic. It's the exact opposite. It's like,
mhm,
no, it's like, wow, the fact that we're born, and then yet, I mean, I had a friend this last year commit suicide
mhm.
who I thought was a-okay. Like, you put him in a room with most people, you'd think he's one of the most solid people out there, and so you just go, okay, like there are people hurting. The other thing that I want to just point out is the importance of relationships, and just like what you guys encourage us to do is embrace the fragile areas in our life. Um, but I think it's hard to live intentionally if you're not going to be intentional with relationships.
Yeah.
So a lot of, I mean, it's again, this the last thing we want to be is too specific or too general. And I think it comes down to, yeah, once we get over the financial freedom, wanting to be able to travel, I think one of the best definitions is do whatever I want whenever I want. That that's okay. And it's like, okay, that's that at itself is not going to be fulfilling long
Yeah.
term.
Mm-mm.
So, yeah.
Well, and we've said this before, and just like what Greg said, he said, I don't want something like this to have you reflect back on like how intentional you were or to
Yeah.
make you want to be intentional. I had to, because of the nature of the time period of losing the baby and where we were along in the pregnancy, I had to go through a pretty big procedure, a little bit different because I had to go into labor and delivery. Um, and I'll tell you, something like that that's hard, it makes you reflect back. And you don't reflect back. I didn't reflect back on the money I spent on groceries or if I overspent or if I didn't or if I hit my budget. What I was reflecting on is, did I tell my eldest that I loved her today in the midst of it? Did I tell my little, did I give them a hug? Did I tell my husband that I appreciate him? And so all of those things, that's what hits you. And those are the things we forget the most. But it's the amazing thing that we get the opportunity to do that sometimes through people so we don't have to experience that. I don't want to have lost my son. I wish that I could have, been able to be able to have a son. However, um if it means that our story will help someone understand what intentional living is now instead of in 5 years when, then that's what this is about. That's where our story is. We call it in our faith, we know that God works all things for his good, but it's really so that we can be testimonies. And many people have been testimonies in my life. That's why I can stand here today. And the other part that I want to say is here at Better Wealth, we're a team built up of a lot of messy, but we're also a company that we deal in life insurance. And
Yeah.
life is insurance isn't just like, yes, it's big on the and asset, and you guys are great in doing that. But the reality is it's life insurance, which means we also have to deal with messy sometimes when it comes with
Yeah.
life. But when you come to Better Wealth, we're not a fake team. That's why I love that we're doing this podcast. We're not a fake team. We're going to do this because we have people who are experts and have been through war. We have people who have been through great loss. I have lost a multiple of pregnancies, this one the farthest, but we've also had team members that have lost children as well. We have had them lose family members in a big way. We have had them lose they've been through abuse or difficulties in their lives growing up with different things. We have a team that can walk through journeys with you and grieve with you. We're not counselors. We are not able to fix it, but we are able to be here to be a family. And that's why we wanted to also share our story with you, because when we get stories from the front line in the email saying, look how great we're serving today. We have this person who's done this and they've done this with their finances. And these are the goals, or, oh, so-and-so just had a baby, and we're able to celebrate those moments. We as a team behind the scenes, we celebrate those moments.
Yep.
And we as a team celebrate, well, we celebrate the big things, we celebrate the big parts of life, but then we also grieve with you guys. When Caleb said that we just had somebody we're working with that lost their daughter, the entire email thread was everybody being, oh, even though that person doesn't know that everybody in the thread was heartbroken, we were heartbroken. We sent our condolences, but behind the scenes, we were all heartbroken. When Dan worked with somebody recently, even the stories that we have break our heart. We to share it with one another, we're literally emotional. There's crying, there's tears, there's how can we help these people? How can we have a team that loves so deeply and has a heart to serve so deeply that behind the scenes we celebrate you guys, we grieve with you guys. And that's why I know and can sit here today, is because I've watched my team do that for me and I've watched them do that for you. So if you have not yet been a part of BetterWealth, or this is the first time you're listening to an episode, thank you for sticking this long through that
Yeah.
long episode. But please know we are a team that is genuinely desiring intentional living and genuinely serves.
Yeah. Send this out to someone that needs to hear this message. Mariah, is there anything else? I just remember the one conversation I was in with you and another person that will remain nameless, and tears are flowing.
Mm.
And I was sitting there going, okay,
Yeah.
I don't know. So I think it's one of those things where I've learned quite a bit through this as well. Anything else that you want to end? I don't necessarily want to make this there's no call to action in this video other than reflect. And
Yeah, I think, just for the sake of it being a Friday live, or even though it's
yeah,
pre-recorded, our Friday, I do have a parental point. It does kind of come along the same way. It's a book. It's a kid's book. Well, this is a hard book. It's The Moon is Always Round. It's by author Jonathan Gibson, and he shares his tale about when they lost a child through pregnancy and how to tell their child. But the neat thing is this, BetterWealth family, in this book, it asks, what shape is the moon? And throughout this book, this little boy sees the moon in its different phases and talks about the different shapes. But the dad always says, no, son, the moon is always round. It doesn't matter if we see it and it's full and it's lighting up the sky, whether or not we see it when it's so tiny and there's barely a little light, when darkness comes in, it is always round. And it is meant to remind us that God is always good. And so when we look at the sun, we think that that's the joyful times in our life. At night, it's always like made to think like it's bad the night, but we have the moon to still remind us in dark times that there is faithfulness. There are those who love us, that with God being always faithful, and those that we have intentionally sown into always being faithful, we're going to be okay. And so that's a neat book to share in that. If you've not seen that, that's my parental point. And thank you guys for listening to a really hard episode.
thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the BetterWealth podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe, leave a review, and share this with the people that you know and love.